Hello, Internet. It's Daniel with Driving and Dragons. Back today to talk about some Wizards of the Coast news that is broke this morning. I still need to get around to doing my 2023 things that Wizards of the Coast fucked up special. Just because we kind of all need a recap of all the times that they've managed to blow their own foot off with that shotgun that they hold to it. As far as video goes today, we are removing the oil pan from the 280ZX. Really, a lot of this is just me laying on my back and cussing and holding various wrenches up while I try to get the 20 some odd bolts off of that oil pan so that I can put it up on the lift and get the oil pan off and replace the oil pan gasket. So, let's talk Wizards of the Coast. I wanted to do my big 2023 omnibus, but instead we're going to talk about the news of the day. This broke, as far as I know, from Roll for Combat. OGGM has spoke about it, and of course it's starting to blow up everywhere. It's on Gamer Rant and all kinds of other places now too. That Wizards of the Coast, or rather Hasbro, is in talks to sell the electronic gaming rights of Dungeons & Dragons wholesale to Tencent, which is a Chinese entertainment conglomerate. This would not be necessarily a bad thing. Now, it is, to start with, there's a lot to do about nothing when it involves this. It makes sense if you listen to what the executives at Hasbro have said about Dungeons & Dragons over the past year. And that is that Dungeons & Dragons, they see Dungeons & Dragons as a branding and marketing opportunity more than as a product, which makes sense. Let's do a flashback. Somebody do the wind chimes for me, as we go into the dream sequence here, and go all the way back to the earlier part of last year when OGGM was talking about Hasbro stock and stuff like that. And I'd come out and mentioned that Dungeons & Dragons, Hasbro's stock is not really a direct reflection of Dungeons & Dragons, because Dungeons & Dragons is not a moneymaker for Hasbro. It's not. As a matter of fact, the only reason Dungeons & Dragons was even really profitable for Hasbro last year is because they had the Baldur's Gate 3 royalties, and Baldur's Gate 3 was a rousing success. It's just not a moneymaker, and it never has been. Hasbro is largely riding on the back of Magic the Gathering, which Wizards of the Coast has managed to shoot in its other foot. So we'll see how that happens. But not Dungeons & Dragons. You fast forward to today, and I think it would actually help Hasbro stock quite a bit to sell off these rights. Because all they're really doing is Hasbro has a property that is very recognizable, has brand recognition. I think they're a little bit missing the boat. They should have been selling off these branding and royalty producing rights. They should have been selling them off wholesale probably 4 years ago, as the geek culture started to really hit its zenith, and you really had that hard push that made Dungeons & Dragons once again a cultural giant. So I think they're a little late to the game. But this is really a way to help Dungeons & Dragons overall survive in a business sense, because all they do is they turn around and they say, hey, Tencent, you own multiple gaming companies. Like, I think they own Ubisoft and 4 Software and just a bunch. They own part or whole of tons, many, many, many different companies that produce video games, and like Supercell that makes Clash of Clans is one of their companies. By selling the rights and they already own some of the rights, because they own some of the rights and some of the likenesses that was used to make Baldur's Gate 3 and a couple other things that have come out over the past couple of years. But by really just handing the rights over wholesale to this large company, you're going to have a bunch of different video game companies that put out a bunch of different kinds of D&D games. It's going to keep everybody's mind to the forefront. It will cost Hasbro nothing. They'll just get paid out half a penny on the dollar or tenth of a penny on the dollar for all these different games and products that this Chinese mega company sells out. I do not think that Hasbro will sell off the whole of Dungeons and Dragons. I think they might turn around and sell the movie and TV rights to somebody else instead of trying to make another disastrous flop out of trying to produce their own movie. So I think they'll sell it off to some other Universal Pictures or something like that. I think they'll start selling off piece by piece the ability to produce anything related to Dungeons and Dragons. And soon you'll see that there is no Dungeons and Dragons at all at Hasbro. This makes sense. It makes a ton of sense by the end of this year. Go through the 50th anniversary, push for all the nostalgia, get as much as you can out of the fan base to make the property as valuable as it can be, as much of that name value as you can get, and then turn around and unload it. Get some cash up front, significant influx of liquid assets that you can use for paying debts and things of that nature, and then sell it off wholesale. Just start selling it piecemeal to different producers on the back end. And then next thing you know, Wizards doesn't need Wizards of the Coast no longer would need a single employee for Dungeons and Dragons to make profit. Which I think is kind of funny, because if I'm not mistaken, Wizards of the Coast doesn't have the rights anymore anyway. I think Hasbro, the parent company, took over the rights. So basically they've just, like a tick, they've dug their head into Wizards of the Coast and sucked out everything of value, and now they're liquidating that for their own use. It would be good if they started selling all this stuff off. I do have my fears. I would hate for them to sell the tabletop role-playing game rights to a company like Paizo, for instance. I know there's going to be some people who give me some heat for that, but you have to remember, Paizo is even more SJW woke crazy than Wizards of the Coast is. So you definitely don't want a company like Paizo getting the rights to produce. To be honest, I don't think you want a company like, say, Troll Lord Games that, tends to lean the other way, getting the rights either. You want somebody who's going to keep their nose out of people's personal politics. They're going to get off the social justice train and just make good fantasy content so that you have the most widespread appeal possible. I don't think it's possible for Wizards of the Coast to do that anymore. So selling off those rights would ultimately be a good thing for Dungeons and Dragons, and possibly a good thing for the hobby across the board. It's the only way that they can really save face with that hard left-wing professional complainer crowd, while also managing to do an appendectomy and get rid of that swollen abscess that is things like Mackenzie and the other just stupid things that Wizards has done in order to pander to that base. This is the only way they could really reset to normal and not get an outcry from the only people who still buy their crap. But as a whole, I think it is a little blown up. It's a little bit over the top. Most of this is speculative right now. As far as I know, there's no real confirmation for it, just some roughly translated or Google translated Chinese news sources and a couple of leaks over here that they're in talks. But I would not doubt it for a minute. And like I said, I'm really surprised that they didn't sell this stuff off, years ago. The IP is the value, not the products. And if you can outsource the cost of printing books, paying writers, paying artists, if you can outsource the programming and the code and the marketing and the sales of the video games and stuff like that, you're basically outsourcing your costs and making a passive income out of it, which would be a good thing overall. And it's really one of the only things that is left to Hasbro to save the sinking ship they're on. Hasbro as a company is not doing well. They're not a healthy company. So this is one of the few things they could do that could really inject some cash back into the situation without seriously pissing off stockholders with some of the other things they can do. Like, you don't want them selling off their stock, liquidating. Next thing you know, all your major firms will be unloading their stock, which would drive it even lower. So they gotta be careful what they do. The whole panic of, oh my God, Wizards of the Coast is selling Dungeons and Dragons. That's people reading headlines and not knowing what they're talking about. It is not a wholesale, whether they're talking good or bad, it is not a wholesale liquidation of Dungeons and Dragons. It's just simply, hey, we're going to sell off these rights, and I'm surprised they haven't done it before. Other than that, who here wants to bet that this one D&D rollout that they have just gets botched every way you can possibly botch it, and we end up with a player's handbook that comes out late summer and late release. You don't have a monster manual till the middle of next year. Hell, they may even just not do a Dungeon Master's Guide at all because, I mean, clearly they just want you to buy modules and do things the way they say it. I mean, they've pretty much done everything they can to piss off and remove the Dungeon Master as a whole over the past several years. I mean, when do we get our AI Dungeon Master from Wizards of the Coast? Let me know in the comment section below. It's a little bit rambly. Like I said, just kind of picked this news up today. But I look forward to hearing what everybody has to say about it. Talk to you soon.